So let's talk about something that feels, well, a little Orwellian. This isn't just a story about changing some rules. It's about a systematic effort to change reality itself by erasing the very evidence we use to see and prove discrimination.
Here's a question for you. How can a rule that applies to every single person equally end up being unfair, right? It sounds like a complete paradox, but unpacking that question is absolutely key to understanding what's going on here.
Okay, so let me give you a classic example that really nails this down from a famous court case. A company required a high school diploma for its higher-paying jobs. Seems totally fair on the surface, doesn't it? But because of a long history of segregated and unequal schools, this rule, this neutral rule, ended up blocking a lot of incredibly qualified black applicants. The diploma had nothing to do with how well you could do the job. So it wasn't the intention that mattered, it was the outcome.
And that's where this really powerful idea comes in. Disparate impact. For decades, this has basically been our legal system's X-ray. It lets us see the hidden, structural kinds of discrimination that aren't about someone's personal prejudice. You don't have to prove someone is a hateful person, you just have to show that their seemingly fair policy is causing real discriminatory harm.
But what happens when that tool, that X-ray for seeing injustice, becomes the target itself? Well, that's exactly what we're going to look at next. There's been a clear blueprint to take it apart.
And look at how fast this all happened. We're not talking years, we're talking a matter of months. One after another, a whole series of executive orders and memos came down, systematically ripping out the federal government's ability to enforce civil rights. And it all leads up to that big one on April 23rd, which flat out told federal agencies to stop using disparate impact as a tool.
And here's the justification they gave. And you really have to see this to believe it. The claim is that disparate impact, the tool designed to fight discrimination, is actually causing it. The argument is that it forces companies into some kind of racial balancing. It's an argument that completely flips the logic of civil rights law on its head.
But just changing the rules of the game wasn't the whole plan. It went a lot deeper than that. It went after the evidence itself.
You see, there was a problem with just changing the rules. As long as the data was still there, people could still connect the dots. They could still see the patterns of discrimination. So the next step had to be much more fundamental.
So, if you really want to make discrimination impossible to prove, what do? It's pretty simple, actually. You get rid of the proof. You erase the data. It's like that old question. If a tree falls in the forest and you destroy all the recordings, did it even make a sound?
And here's how that playbook works. It's a pretty straightforward three-step process. First, you target the main source of the data. In this case, something called the civil rights data collection. Then, you start erasing categories, like proposing to stop collecting data on transgender and non-binary students, which makes those groups totally invisible in the numbers. And the end result? The patterns of systemic harm just vanish. Not because the harm is gone, but because you've destroyed the ability to see it.
And the results? Well, they were immediate and they were massive. Just look at this number.
That's right. Over 3,000 civil rights complaints were just thrown out by the Department of Education in a single 3-month window. To put that in perspective, former officials said a pace like that was just unheard of. With the data gone and a new order to stop enforcing these things, thousands of people's cases were closed before they were even investigated.
And look, these aren't just numbers or abstract policies, right? This stuff has very real consequences for very real people living their everyday lives.
You can see how it all connects, like a chain reaction. You weaken fair housing rules, and suddenly it's easier for segregation to continue, which hurts Black and disabled communities. You stop looking at school discipline data, and higher suspension rates for students of color can just fly under the radar. You let biased AI make decisions about benefits, well, you're going to see a lot more rejections for people who don't speak English or who have a disability. Every action has a reaction. And to make sure all this stuck, the government's ability to even do the enforcement work was gutted. 7 out of 12 regional civil rights offices at the Department of Education were just closed.
But get this, the staff who were laid off from those offices, they were paid almost $1 million a week to not work. This was never about saving money. It was about shutting down the entire operation, making it impossible for the government to enforce the law.
Okay, so that's the story of the takedown. But it's not the end of the story, because this whole thing has been met with a pretty massive and organized pushback.
The pushback is coming from all sides, really. You've got state attorneys general suing, arguing these moves are unconstitutional.
You have states like California basically saying, fine, we'll write our own stronger laws then. And of course, civil rights groups are taking this straight to court and have actually won some temporary victories, hitting the pause button on some of these changes. So this battle is very much alive in courtrooms right now.
Which brings us back to the big question, right? When you delete the data, what are you actually erasing? You're not erasing the discrimination that people feel every day. You're just erasing our ability to see it, to prove it, and to do something about it. So the question isn't whether discrimination will still exist. It's whether we'll have any accountability left.